$22,000. That is what I listed this property for. A wood frame house, a working well, a septic system, and 40 acres of mixed timber and open field in a rural American county. The price of a decent used pickup truck. 3 buyers drove out to see it within the first 2 weeks. None of them made an offer. A 4th buyer eventually closed the deal, paid cash, and understood exactly what he was getting. By the time he signed, he also understood something that most people who clicked on the listing never figured out. The asking price was real, but it was the smallest number in the entire transaction. Listings like this one exist across rural America right now, not dozens, thousands. Appalachian counties in Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, Rust Belt parcels in southern Ohio and upstate New York, Deep South acreage in Mississippi, Alabama, rural Georgia, Ozark Hill Country in Missouri and Arkansas. If you have spent any time on Zillow, Realtor, or LandWatch searching outside the major metros, you have seen them. A house with land for the price of a used car. Maybe $15,000, maybe $22,000, maybe $30,000, with a barn included. And the first question everyone asks is the same. Is this real, or is something wrong with the listing? I can answer that. The listing is real, the price is not a mistake, and yes, something is wrong. Though not in the way most people expect. I handled this transaction from listing to close, which means I reviewed every document, watched 3 buyers walk away, and eventually found the one person for whom this property made sense. What I want to do now is take you through every layer of what that asking price does and does not include, because the gap between those two things is the reason most people who clicked never bought. The property was a wood frame house, probably built in the late 1940s or early 1950s, 2 main rooms downstairs, a small loft, a covered front porch that faced west across an open field. Behind the field, 40 acres of mixed hardwood timber ran uphill toward a ridge. The listing photographs showed the field, the tree line, the porch, and the view from the ridge on a clear day. They were honest photographs. They showed exactly what was there. What they did not show was the roof, which was original to a much later renovation and showing its age from above. They did not show the interior walls, which still had the original wood paneling and a wood stove in the main room that served as the primary heat source. They did not show the access road, and the access road, as it turned out, was where the first 3 buyers stopped reading. The asking price was not arbitrary. The seller, an heir who had inherited the property after a long probate, understood exactly what the market for this kind of asset looked like. Rural properties in this condition category, in low-demand counties, more than 20 miles from the nearest town of any size, sell to cash buyers. That is essentially the entire buyer pool. Conventional lenders will not finance a structure in this condition at this price point. FHA loans require properties to meet minimum property standards, and an uninhabited aging rural home almost never qualifies without significant repairs made first. USDA rural housing loans have their own eligibility requirements, both geographic and structural. The seller knew this, the price reflected it. In low-demand rural counties, 40 acres of mixed-use land with limited road access can have a legitimate market value well under $30,000, depending on timber quality, soil, water, and the availability of comparable buyers. The house, needing the work it needed, added almost nothing to that number. Before I get into what was actually wrong with this property, I want to stop and say something directly, because it is the thing most people get wrong before they ever look at the first photograph. The purchase price on any piece of real estate is an entrance fee. It is not a total cost. In the suburban market, buyers understand this intuitively. They know the mortgage comes with taxes, insurance, maintenance, and eventual repairs. They budget accordingly. But when a property costs $19,000 or $22,000, something changes in how the brain processes the number. People unconsciously compare it to a car. They budget for it the way they budget for a car. The sticker price is most of the story, and the registration and insurance feel minor by comparison. That cognitive shift is exactly where the catch begins. Everything I'm about to tell you is about what the entrance fee does not include. The road to this property left the county-maintained surface about 3/4 of a mile before reaching the house. From that point, the access was a shared private road, shared between this parcel and one neighboring property further back. Private roads are not maintained by the county. They are maintained in theory by the property owners who use them. In practice, maintenance happens inconsistently, expenses arise unexpectedly, and the legal responsibility is only as clear as the recorded easement language, which in this case was informal. The county had a record of the easement, but the language regarding maintenance responsibility was vague enough that a real estate attorney would flag it immediately. This matters beyond the inconvenience of a rough road. Road condition affects insurability. Some carriers will decline coverage or add exclusion riders when emergency vehicles cannot reliably access a structure. Road condition affects lender acceptability, though at this price point, there were no lenders involved. And road condition determines whether the property is genuinely accessible year-round, which in a county that gets ice and mud seasons is a serious practical question. The road in summer was passable but rough. In mud season, it became unreliable. In a hard winter, without a high-clearance vehicle and some willingness to work for access, it could become impassable. The first buyer who drove out on a Tuesday liked the land. He called back with an offer. Then he asked about the road. The answer ended the offer. Beyond the road, the utilities told a similar story. No municipal water, well only. The well itself was functioning, but the pump appeared to be original to the structure, which placed it at or near the end of its expected service life. Well pump replacement costs range from roughly $3,000 to $8,000 depending on the depth of the well, the pump type, and what a contractor charges in that county. The septic system was present, but its age and condition were unknown at the time of listing. Septic inspections are not always required at closing in rural counties, but they are strongly advisable. A failed septic system costs between $8,000 and $20,000 or more to replace, depending on soil percolation results and local regulations. Electrical service was connected, but the panel was original. Any serious renovation or any attempt to bring the property up to a standard that would satisfy a lender on a future sale would trigger a panel upgrade, typically in the range of $2,000 to $6,000. Internet access was satellite only, which has improved in recent years but remains a meaningful lifestyle and work-from-home consideration that an increasing number of buyers treat as a deal-breaker before they even discuss the purchase price. The road and the utilities were the visible catch. The buyers who pulled away after hearing about the road assumed they had found the whole story. They had not. The property had a structural history that the listing photographs were not designed to communicate. The house had been uninhabited for approximately 3 to 5 years. This is common in this property category. Estates move through probate slowly, heirs live out of state, nobody wants to deal with a rural property that needs work, so the decision gets deferred until it cannot be deferred any longer. Uninhabited rural homes deteriorate faster than occupied ones. The reasons are straightforward. Nobody notices the leak when it starts. Nobody catches the pest intrusion in the first season. HVAC systems that sit dormant develop problems. Pipes that are not winterized properly freeze. By the time a property like this reaches the market, the deferred maintenance has compounded. The roof showed visible aging on the exterior photographs, if you knew what to look for. An inspector would need to assess the decking beneath the shingles to give an accurate picture, but roof replacement costs for a small rural home of this size run from roughly $8,000 to $18,000, depending on the roofing material, the pitch, the decking condition, and contractor pricing in that market. The foundation was pier and beam construction, which is common in homes of this era and region, and which is inspectable, but requires a qualified inspector who can get beneath the structure to assess the condition of the piers, the beams, and any moisture damage. The wood stove in the main room was the primary heat source. This is not unusual in rural properties of this age, but it is a significant insurance consideration that most buyers do not think about until they try to obtain a policy. When the eventual buyer, the one who closed, ordered an inspection, the report ran to multiple pages. Not because the house was unsalvageable, but because a decades-old rural home that has been sitting empty accumulates deferred maintenance that has to be documented item by item. The buyer read every page. He did not walk away. He used the report to build a realistic understanding of his actual first-year investment. By the time a serious buyer has the access information, the utility assessment, and the inspection report, they have a complete picture of the physical property. What most of them still do not fully understand at that point is what it will cost to insure it, and what it will cost them eventually to sell it. Before I get to that, let me say something about the word affordable. A property is only affordable if you can afford to own it, not just buy it. The monthly cost of ownership on a $22,000 rural property is not zero. Property taxes in low-cost rural counties are typically modest, sometimes a few $100s per year, but they are not zero. Insurance, when it is available and when it can be obtained, is a real annual expense. Road maintenance, if the shared easement requires contribution, is a recurring cost. Capital reserves for the well, the septic, and the roof are not optional expenses. They are deferred certainties. If you buy this property and the well pump fails in year 2, that cost exists regardless of what you paid at closing. A $20,000 property that requires $35,000 in immediate repairs and carries $3,000 per year in ownership costs is a fundamentally different financial object than the listing price implies. That does not make it a bad deal. It makes it a different deal than the number on the listing card suggests. The question is never only, can I buy this? It is, can I sustain this? For how long and toward what purpose? Rural properties with wood frame construction, advanced age, wood stove heat, private road access, and significant distance from the nearest fire station face real challenges in the insurance market. Insurers assess fire risk partly through distance to the nearest responding fire department. Properties beyond a certain threshold, often discussed in the range of 5 to 10 road miles from a fire station, are rated at higher risk, may carry higher premiums, or may be declined by standard carriers entirely. A wood-burning primary heat source adds additional scrutiny. If emergency vehicles cannot reliably access the property due to the road condition, coverage terms may be affected further. In practice, this means a buyer of this kind of property may need to work with a specialty rural property insurer or a non-standard carrier. Annual premiums for a rural wood frame home in a non-flood zone typically run somewhere in the range of $1,200 to $2,500 per year at minimum, and meaningfully higher in flood-adjacent areas or where fire access ratings are poor. That number is real annual cost that did not appear in the listing price. On the flood question, 40 acres near a creek, a river bottom, or low-lying ground in the American South or Midwest has a meaningful probability of containing some land that falls within a designated flood zone. FEMA flood maps are publicly accessible. I check them on this property, and I check them on every rural property I evaluate. If any portion of the structure, the access road, or the primary use area sits within a special flood hazard area, what FEMA designates as a Zone AE or equivalent, flood insurance may be required by any future lender and is strongly advisable regardless. Flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program currently runs, broadly speaking, in the range of $700 to $3,000 or more per year depending on the zone, the coverage amount, the elevation of the structure, and the state. And the land itself, if partially inundated seasonally, is not fully usable acreage. 40 acres on a deed does not always mean 40 usable acres on the ground. If you have been finding genuine value in what this analysis covers, the real numbers behind listings like this one, the layers of ownership cost the photograph does not show, then subscribing keeps this kind of information in your feed. That is what this channel is here for. Now the catch that buyers discover last and feel longest. When the buyer who eventually purchased this property decides to sell, 10 years from now or 20, he will face the same buyer pool that the seller faced. Cash buyers only, a patient timeline. Limited comparable sales to anchor a higher asking price, even after significant improvements. This is the resale illiquidity problem, and it is the part of rural distressed property ownership that most people do not think about at the moment they fall in love with the acreage. Rural properties in low-demand counties do not appreciate the way suburban properties do, because the forces that drive suburban appreciation, rising local employment, population growth, increasing buyer competition, access to credit, are largely absent. When a buyer improves a property in this category, they may be spending above what the local market ceiling will support at resale. The ceiling is set by local income levels and local demand for similar properties, not by the quality of the renovation. Over-improving relative to that ceiling is a real risk that investors in this space occasionally learn the hard way. This property is not a liquid investment. It is a lifestyle purchase or a long-hold land asset. Those are legitimate categories, but they are not the same as buying something you could resell in 18 months if your circumstances changed. The buyer who closed understood all of this before he signed. He was not a first-time home buyer. He was not a commuter trying to find a cheaper place to live within driving distance of a job. He was not a short-term investor expecting to renovate and resell. He was a semi-retired man in his late 50s with experience on rural property, mechanical skills, and a brother-in-law in the trades. He paid cash, which meant no financing contingency, no appraisal requirement, and no lender minimum property standards to satisfy. He had already budgeted for the well pump before the inspection confirmed it. He accepted the road situation because he owned a truck capable of handling it and did not depend on reliable daily access for work. He was not buying a primary residence in any conventional sense. He was buying a retreat property and an eventual retirement base, and he had no expectation of selling it within the next decade. For this specific buyer, this was a genuinely good transaction. The land alone, 40 acres of mixed hardwood timber with no debt on it, was worth more to him over a 10-year hold than the total of what he paid plus what he planned to spend. The house was almost incidental to the purchase. He was buying 40 acres with a structure on it that he could make habitable on his own timeline. The land was the asset. The house was the bonus. The same property offered to a young family needing reliable road access adequate school proximity, fast internet, and room for a mortgage would have been a disaster. The same property offered to a buyer expecting to finance, it would have been impossible to close. The same property offered to someone expecting to renovate and resell within 2 years would likely have cost them money. Here's what I want you to take from that. Cheap is not a property quality. It is a relationship between a price and a specific buyer. The same listing that was exactly right for one person was completely wrong for 9 others who were equally intelligent, equally interested, and equally looking at the same photograph. The buyers who drove out and left were not making a mistake. They were not the right buyer for this particular asset. That is not a failure on their part. It is the market working correctly, sorting properties to the buyers who can actually use them. The question to carry into any listing like this one is never simply, is this a deal? It is this a deal for me specifically? Given my cash position, my skills, my timeline, my tolerance for road conditions, my ability to absorb a well pump failure or a roof replacement without financial crisis, and my willingness to hold an illiquid asset for years? Most people who ask that question honestly will conclude that the answer is no. That is the right answer for them. So let me give you the full verdict. The house sold for the price of a car. That number was real. The seller was not desperate in a predatory sense, not trying to mislead anyone. He was pricing a cash-only, condition-challenged, access-limited rural property at what the market would actually bear. And the market's answer was $22,000 to one patient buyer who happened to be exactly the right person. The catch was not one thing. It never is with properties in this category. The catch was a sequence of layers, each one narrowing the buyer pool further until only one person remained. Before you make an offer on any listing that looks like this one, I want you to ask 6 questions. First, is the road to the property county maintained or private? And if private, what does the easement actually say about maintenance? Second, what is the age and condition of the well and the septic system, and have they been inspected? Third, is conventional financing actually available for this property, or is cash the only realistic path to closing? Fourth, have you contacted a rural insurance carrier and gotten an actual quote for this structure, this road, this distance from a fire station? Fifth, does any portion of the land or the structure sit in a FEMA-designated flood zone? And if so, what does flood insurance cost? Sixth, what does the resale market look like in this county for properties in this category? And how long are you prepared to hold before you could realistically sell? Those 6 questions are the complete map of what the listing price does not tell you. Listings like this one are not scams. They are not listing errors. They are not bait-and-switch advertising. They are properties priced at what a specific, narrow buyer pool will pay, given all the factors that broader demand cannot absorb. For the right buyer, patient, liquid, skilled or connected, with a long timeline, no income dependency on the property, and a realistic view of rural land as a hold rather than a flip, this category can represent one of the most unusual remaining opportunities in American real estate. For most buyers, most of the time, the price is not the catch. The catch is the gap between what the price appears to promise and what ownership actually costs. Look at that listing photograph again. The covered porch, the open field, the tree line at the edge of the property running up toward the ridge. It is still beautiful. The 40 acres are still there. The price was not a mistake, and the land has not changed. You just know, now, what you are actually looking at. I want to hear from you on this one. After seeing the full picture, the road, the well, the financing reality, the insurance, the resale illiquidity, the total cost of ownership, would the land still be enough? Would you consider a deal like this if you had the cash and the timeline? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you want me to go deeper on any single layer of this, the rural insurance problem, the road easement issue, the cash-only financing reality in distressed property markets, tell me which one and I will build a dedicated video around it.